In this tutorial for Team Yankee, I want to go over how you pick your spotting team, how you check range, and a few other restrictions on who can shoot artillery bombardments. So again, going through our artillery sequence that's on page 51, we're going to talk about picking a spotting team and checking for range. So how do you pick your spotting team? Well, you actually have several choices. They are limited, but you do have several choices. So let's say this is the artillery unit that's wanting to do the bombardment, the artillery bombardment, and they're wanting to range in on this spot. Any one of these teams can be the spotting team if they can see the target here. So if we put these behind a building, they can't see the spot, but this one can, so this would have to be the observer. So who's ever shooting the artillery bombardment, pick one of the teams. They can, as long as they can see the spot, they can be your spotter. Another one could be if you're running a unit. Let's say these tanks are out here, and you got a unit leader. He can spot for the artillery bombardment. So if these guys are behind this building here, and they can't see the target, he can call it in for them, and then they can do the artillery bombardment. But, you know, maybe they're busy, so you can take your HQ. Now, you go to your HQ card, and your commander for that, in this case, it would be this one. And for, like, the men here, it would be this. So if you're running a BMP one, this group here, the AK-74 team, can spot. In this case, this one tank, if it's your HQ, could spot. The last one is an actual observer. Now, if you go to your formation cards, it'll say like OP. That stands for like observation post. And if we go to its card and look, it says observer. So those are our choices. If the unit is doing the artillery bombardment, you can pick one of the teams if they can see it. Every one of these, your observer has to be able to see that spot. So that's just there. If you have a unit, it could be a unit of men, unit of tanks, unit of helicopters, jet aircraft, whatever. If they can see the spot, they can call the artillery bombardment, the HQ, or your OP, your observation post. All right, so we covered who can spot, who can be the spotting team for an artillery bombardment, but there are a few other restrictions I want to go through. I just wanted to just limit to line of sight just so you can get an idea and not be overwhelmed with all that information in this. So we've gone through who can, and it has to be line of sight, but there's a few other restrictions we need to call for, and that is they can only call in artillery bombardment for one unit. So if this calls in, this unit leader calls in for them, they cannot use that one. They have to use this or that or themselves or some other unit leader to call in the artillery bombardment because he's too busy calling it in for them. Another restriction is the observer could not have moved. So if these tanks moved up, he can't call in the artillery bombardment. If they moved, but he didn't, he could still call it in. Another one would be attempting to dig in, success or failure, and that more applies to infantry. So if the infantry digs in, they're too busy digging foxholes to call in an artillery bombardment. And another restriction is you cannot shoot or assault. So if this tank spots, it's not going to be able to shoot or assault. Also, it did not move. Basically, it does nothing that turn because it's too busy giving grid coordinates and seeing how the firing's coming in and maybe change it, 100 yards to the left or something like that. So basically, if it's spotting, can't move, can't shoot, can't assault. Now there are a few other restrictions with the shooting team that's shooting the artillery. First of all, I went through like basically the line there that they have to have artillery in their name or salvo. I went through that, but there's a few other restrictions that I want to cover, and one of them is that they could not have moved. So if these carnations moved, they cannot fire artillery bombardment. If the helicopter moves, it can't do a salvo. The only one that would be allowed to move and still do it would be strike aircraft. And they are the only ones that can move and spot also, because they just come in on the table and leave. So if they want to spot, but that means they're not shooting or anything, they can do it. Helicopters cannot unless they're stationary. Another one is if the unit is pinned down, and that has to do with infantry. If they've got mortars or something and they are pinned down, they cannot do an artillery bombardment. They could still call it in, they just cannot participate in the artillery bombardment. Now there's other restrictions too about, or is it in range and stuff, and we'll cover that, but that's the basics. So the last thing is it in range? And how we find that out is we go to our card of who is shooting. So if it's the carnation shooting, the artillery has to be within 88 inches of where you want to shoot, of where you want the aiming point to be. And I've gone over how to check range. I'm not going to go over all that. It's just basically this is like the whole of the vehicle or the base of the min. So measure that out. Some have shorter ranges though, like the Heinz here have a 20-inch range. So do check the range because some are not as long as others. This is 88, these are 20. So that's it on this video. Who can do artillery, or who can spot for the artillery bombardments? There's a few other restrictions on who can fire bombardments and measuring to make sure it's in range of your weapon.